All right. Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Expert Witness with Doug Miner and Stephen Palmieri. Thank you guys all for joining us. We bring this to you guys to bring you some amazing, entertaining, and informative content. If you are joining us live, feel free to message below. And there's Doug over there with the technical difficulties going on. He's kind of like circle looping it. So yes, if you get questions, chat them below. We're here for you. We'll post them up on the screen. We'll talk about what you guys are interested in. Doug Miner started in credit repair and got into being an expert witness by accident. An attorney hired him and was like, hey, can you write what you think about this? And then they sent him a check for a bunch of money. And he was like, what's this? And they were like, well, I guess you were just an expert. And then now Doug is a full-time qualified expert witness on damages, especially credit reporting damages, FCRA, all that kind of good stuff. Doug,
Yeah.
enough of the introduction. Let's hear from the man, the legend himself. How are you, sir? It's been a couple of weeks since we've seen you, man. What's going on, brother?
Yeah, it's been a while. I had to take a little vacation for a while, but back, excited to do this, excited to talk to everyone. And kind of like we talked about before the show, there's some marketing ideas I think that we can talk about that transition from credit repair to also the expert witness work. And I've been on both sides of it in multiple different ways. So, as a baseline, we can talk about divorce, but I think in particular, I want to talk about how that can affect credit repair companies. Do they focus on it as a way of marketing? And then also how it transitions into the expert witness work that I do.
So kind of like what I'm hearing from you is if our listeners here are a little light in the pocketbook and you're trying to get some more cash, just hang outside of the divorce court with your business cards. Huh? Is that kind of what I'm saying? What I'm hearing from you, man? That's kind of like wide open opportunity, huh?
Well, right. Everyone's probably familiar with the blue ocean strategy, right? Well, I don't know how crowded this space is in this particular area, but I can tell you just from whether it was when I was in the mortgage industry or whether it was when I was doing full-time credit repair or as doing the expert witness work, divorces, I would say it to you this way. I've never seen a divorce in over 35 years of doing this stuff that someone's credit wasn't messed up.
Sure.
Now, is it credit repair worthy or not? That's debatable, right? But as far as helping someone through a situation like that or dealing with credit issues, it's like I said, I've never seen a case or a divorce situation come across my desk or a phone call that hasn't had a problem.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, right? Because obviously, our folks listening here are mostly credit repair business owners, and it kind of doesn't necessarily matter what caused the problems. It's just people come to us with some sort of a problem. But divorces are interesting because there's oftentimes a divorce decree, which sometimes may be misunderstood by our clients, because we have clients, right? And they're like, oh, that account, that shouldn't be reporting like that because my ex said he was going to pay for it. Well, it's in the divorce decree. Well, okay, but I mean, your creditor doesn't really care about the divorce decree because that's an inferior contract. Like you and your spouse co-signed, y'all both took equal risk, and that is your contract between you and the creditor. And so that's it. You're bound with the creditor as both of you guys as co-signers. And then if some point you decide to dissolve your legal marriage union, the creditor doesn't really care much about that, right? And so we see that a lot where people just think, oh, well, it was a divorce decree. You're supposed. The way you get around that is you have to sue your ex, like for violating the divorce decree, which, I mean, practically speaking, good luck with that, right? Because if they're not paying the creditors, they ain't got nothing for you to sue them to, like start paying the bills. So that's just kind of like the raw end of the stick. But as far as damages, I mean, that's really what your expertise is with being an expert witness. So, let's talk a little bit about that, man. What's on your mind? How can we, what do you see as far as, cases, unjust credit reporting, damages when it comes to divorce type credit and stuff?
Yeah, divorces, like you said, they're ripe with credit problems. So I don't know how many of the credit repair companies sort of engage in, professional consultations with clients as to how to navigate a divorce. Um, do they market or do they solicit business from divorce attorneys at all? But you bring up, a pretty common scenario where the divorce decree says one thing and the spouse who's supposed to pay doesn't pay. How that translates into what I do is where if someone was supposed to pay the mortgage and then the mortgage goes late because the spouse that was awarded the house doesn't pay the mortgage, but there's a hold harmless section in the agreement, then it'll come across my desk in an expert witness capacity, typically in a scenario of whichever spouse didn't get the house but was harmed by the actions of the other. So to your point, I want to sort of address, is there damages? Sure, there definitely can be damages. How much? It depends upon each socioeconomic level. But when you're dealing with a home, they're typically, or there's a high probability of there being equity in the property, right? Or forcing them to sell the house so that, let's say that the account doesn't fall into foreclosure or go into a worse status, right? Or does the spouse that's not obligated under the divorce decree bring it current, keep it current until the house can be sold, and then try to recoup the money in damages later, right? So there's a lot of different ways these things can go, and obviously the personalities of the individuals, the emotions that go along with this kind of stuff. But I do take part and have many times with a divorcing person, either mid divorce or post divorce, on how to recover their good credit. Typically, that's how a lot of credit repair companies could be involved, right? Helping them recover from these problems. They could be part of the solution leading up to it. If somebody wants to get to them ahead of time, try to get everything separated as much as possible. Don't leave themselves open to a situation like you just described, where one spouse is, obligated to a debt, but they're both on the obligation with the creditor. I wrote a whole article about, qualified name assumptions and different ways to separate a mortgage that a lot of people aren't really aware of. So, and
Talk about that. So when you say how they can separate a mortgage, you mean like actually as part of the divorce, remove yourself as being obligated to the lender? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, well, talk about that, because I mean that's something that you don't really see very much, and it's kind of like at the mercy of the creditor, right? I mean, I can't imagine why a creditor would willingly take somebody off of a loan. That's like bad business from my perspective. Like, why are you going to go ahead and take somebody off the hook? So let's talk about that. That's fascinating. What are the cases, the scenarios where you can get a creditor to do that?
So there's, it's not widely, let's say, marketed or let's say well known, even in the mortgage community, right? There are, what you can do is what's called a qualified name assumption, meaning that the spouse who is going to be taking over the responsibility for the mortgage under the divorce decree can then go and qualify with the existing lender. As long as they qualify, then the other spouse who's trying to get out of the obligation can be released. But
now, I mean, so let's talk about that. So is this in the case of a mortgage that was originally originated in both of their names?
Correct.
So now the lender is, so now they're requalifying as if they're a sole applicant. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So it's qualified name assumption. It kind of, the name sort of spells it out for you in a way. They're qualified, and they're going to assume this person's name as the obligator.
But they're already on it, right? So I mean, the lender is actually losing a person on the hook, though, right? They're going from two people to one, though. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So the person has to really qualify creditworthiness, like as if under the current guidelines of the lender, they were going to get this $400,000 or whatever mortgage by themselves. I mean, is that the general concept of this?
Yeah, as opposed to sort of the simple way, the simple answer to these kinds of things is, well, why doesn't the person just refinance? Well, sure, if the interest rates are better or the terms are better or something like that, but you don't know that at the time, right? So a simple refinance obviously could achieve the same thing, but if the terms aren't as good, why is somebody going to want to refinance it if they're going to have to pay more for the same house?
So, I mean, is this a pretty common thing of all mortgage lenders, or is this kind of like a specialty rare kind of a deal, like a mortgage assumption?
I would put it more in the category of rare. It's not,
Okay.
like I said, it's not widely marketed. It's not widely known about even within the mortgage community. But it is an alternative. And you know what I'll do, Stephen? What I do is I'll send you the article that I wrote about it that explains it more, in much more detail. And if any of your listeners want to read it,
Where can they find that at?
oh gosh, I'm trying to forget which website I wrote it for.
All right. Well, don't hurt your head too much. We'll post it up down below here after the show in the chat. We'll post up the link.
Yeah.
'Cause I can see Doug's head's about to start smoking, and I don't want my co-host over here to like vaporize during this show. So, all right. So you got the qualified mortgage assumption is one way potentially, but it's more of a specialty or rarity. So more so than that. What else? Okay, so let's talk about, I guess, how you may end up in the courtroom for divorce case type damages. I mean, how is somebody damaged when they're co-signed on a loan and they don't pay it? Help me figure out. So where do the damages come in, man?
Well, it's actually, I think it's quite simple actually. If you think about it, you have a husband and wife, and let's assume that the husband is granted the home, but the husband makes, let's say, $5,000 a month, but the mortgage payment alone is $3,500. Now you add on some taxes and insurance, and the PITI, the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance as a baseline on the house is, let's say, over $4,000. So do you think someone who's making $5,000 a month is going to be able to afford a $4,000 a month payment? No,
No.
right? So what typically happens is that, and then what I've seen happen many times is, as soon as let's say the husband in this particular instance is granted the house, he doesn't make any payments. And so
Yeah,
now,
but they're still both on the mortgage.
right, hence
Okay,
that's why they're harmed.
so that's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box here, but these two people agreed contractually with the lender to pay this, and somebody decided to stop paying, and they may have a divorce decree where the other one's like, well, I'm not responsible, but according to the lender, they're still responsible, right? So how do you frame this thing up for damages there? And who's the one being damaged and who's the one like being accused and all this kind of stuff? Like, is it because so the lender's not involved, is what you're saying, right? Like
Right.
they're not accusing,
Yeah.
it's the two parties. Like,
Right. You're asking about how someone's damaged. So think about it this way, Stephen. If you're on a mortgage with your wife, you guys split up, and the mortgage payment's 10 grand a month, and you can't afford it, but you're granted the house, and your wife's still on the loan, and you can't afford it. So Stephen, misses the payments, right? Well, who's damaged? You're damaged. You're damaging your own credit, but at the same time, you're damaging your spouse's credit, because you're supposed to be able. You've
if you
taken up.
co-sign, man, shoot. And plus, she should have never married me to start with, man. She should have known that was going to happen. You know what I mean? But okay, so let's talk about this because I'm not trying to bust you up. I think this is important. So we both agreed to co-sign, and then we agreed to get divorced. So then we have this divorce decree that says we're getting divorced. So are you basically saying because of the violation of the divorce decree, that's kind of where the damages are being argued against, right? It's the divorce decree
Yeah,
agreement essentially being violated?
be clear, right? There's a whole harmless portion of that agreement in the divorce decree. So you're saying I'm going to take over the house and hold you harmless as the spouse. Well, as soon as you start missing the payments, you're harming them.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
your ex, let's say your ex spouse had excellent credit, 780 credit score. Well, now, unbeknownst to the spouse, you stop making the payments, and the credit score goes from 780 down to 610 because they're a 30, a 60, a 90-day late on their mortgage. And typically in these agreements, it'll say something along the lines of, okay, and you're to refinance the house within 6 months, and if not, you need to list the house for sale, within a certain time frame. And well, 6 months down the road, the credit's already already damaged so severely from a 30, 60, 90, or 120, could be 180 days past due, right? It's the foreclosure, the NOD's already filed. So now you got a foreclosure on the credit report. And the person who had a 780 credit score now is going to have difficulty even renting a place, right? Or trying to forget about buying a new place.
Yeah.
So in those instances, how is somebody damaged? Well, now they are lost opportunity as far as purchasing a home going forward. They can't do that for, let's say, minimum of 2 to 4 years, typically, depending upon the guidelines. And additionally, if they're to go try and rent with this bad credit, they're going to have to come up with either a much larger security deposit. Let's say instead of a $2,000 security deposit, they're going to have to drop $6,000 out of pocket. And then on top of it, maybe instead of the rent being, $2,500 a month, now it's $3,500 or $3,200 a month because you're a higher risk. Or you may be put in a position where you have to come up with 6 months rent ahead of time, or maybe even a year, because you're such a high credit risk. So there's
Dude, if I'm such a high credit risk, I ain't got 6 months worth of mortgage money to be putting up there. So that brings us to another point, and we got a couple good comments. Eric May posted up a nice thing. We'll get here. Thank you, Eric. But let's not get too sidetracked here. Okay, so let's talk about that. So who's enforcing this in the real world practical application? Because if two people get divorced and one person doesn't have the capability or the capacity to make these payments, obviously they don't have the financial capacity. So if the other spouse were to sue them, I mean, like, why? Like, I mean, obviously it's a bad idea to sue somebody on emotion. That doesn't get you anywhere. There has to be some sort of a good outcome anticipated. What are you going to do? Get a judgment against an insolvent spouse that ain't got no money? So let me ask you that. What types of people are these that are suing their spouse for filing the divorce decree? Are these more like higher end, well-to-do, upper middle class? And I mean, is it fair to say like the average middle class spouse who's screwing the other average middle class ex-spouse by not paying, they're not going to sue each other because they know they're not going to get anything? Like the real world application of enforcing this divorce agreement. Let's talk about that for a minute here. What does that look like? Who's suing who, and what do they hope to get out of it?
Well, so a couple things, right? If their credit's harmed, and let's say the person who's harmed brings the action against the other spouse, the person harmed may, within that same divorce decree, may be ordered to liquidate, $100,000 out of their IRA, or are to issue a lump sum payment to the other spouse because they've taken over the home. Well, they're not gonna want to take the $100,000 out of their IRA, or they're not gonna want to drop $50,000 on their ex-spouse who just jacked up their credit and ruin their credit, right? So the action they're gonna bring the action so that they don't have to come up with this other money that they're supposed to pay the other spouse.
Okay, so we've got assets. You just mentioned an IRA with 100,000 or whatever. So I mean, it's fair to say that these actions typically occur when the violating spouse has some sort of assets that you can get your hands on. Is that a reasonable statement?
I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't want to categorize. Well, first and foremost, look at it this way. Somebody who owns a home is doing fairly well for themselves in some form or fashion financially, right? Otherwise, maybe they inherited the house, but they put a mortgage on it later and refinanced it or something and took cash out. There's any number of stories that could be sort of illustrated and talked about in a situation like this. But I think in general, people who own homes tend to not be on the lower end of the financial scale. I'm going to say middle class, upper class tend to where this is going to happen.
Doug, let me introduce you to 2009, man. That sucked the wealth out of everybody, right? Your ass is getting foreclosed and the ship is going down in the process, right? But no, I hear what you're saying. And so it looks like Eric May said that this is actually your article right here that he posted the link to. Is that
okay?
So
nice. Thanks, Eric. I love it.
Let's see if we can maybe pull that up somewhere. That's kind of neat here. Let's see. Okay, so you keep talking. I'm gonna see if I can pull this article up. Actually, that seems pretty interesting.
Well, thanks. Well, yeah. Now I'm looking at it. It would say qualifying for a mortgage assumption.
Well, do the share screen. Let's share the article real quick. A little share screen on the bottom there. You see
Yeah,
here?
I can't. You can though.
Oh, well, I've got to pull it up. All right, keep talking now. We're getting like totally sidetracked here, but that's
Yeah.
what you guys get for listening to us live. I didn't even get through the powder room. I didn't even shave this morning. So, okay, Doug, keep talking. I'm going to pull up this article, man.
Well, so I'm glad. Hey, Eric, right on, man. Thank you for doing that. Like I said, we can post the article, or I'm sure it's Divorce Oh, there it is, Divorce Magazine. I remember doing that for them. I knew I couldn't remember which one I did it for.
Okay, here we go. Let's see here. Share the screen. Let's see here. Share the screen.
Well, here
we're gonna share the screen right here. Boom. Share the screen. So there we go. Okay. Holy mackerel, wrong monitor. See that you guys are really getting raw and uncut here. Okay, here we go. Rock on. Okay, so what is all this stuff popping up?
I can't. All right. So I want to. I'm looking at the article now, and I think I go into different ways of loan assumptions, and then there's different types of assumable mortgages, whether it's FHA, VA type loans. So I think we want to differentiate the qualified loan assumption as opposed to an assumable loan, because you were asking me the qualified loan assumption is a more rare situation, whereas an FHA, VA type loan that's assumable is far more common, right? So, but they're being used in different ways, especially in a divorce. But the good news is, whether you're in credit repair or whether you're looking to do the expert type work that I do, these are the types of things. If you know these different ways to handle a situation in divorce, and you can save a client a whole lot of headaches and a whole lot of money and a whole lot of problems, or for that matter, in my particular capacity, typically, I'm typically hired by the spouse that has been harmed. That's typically the side that I'm on, because they're looking to me to say, hey, Doug, how much financially have I been damaged by what my spouse did to my credit? And then additionally, they're going to ask for ways to sort of recover from it once the litigation is over, right? And yeah. So however the credit repair companies are structured, there's ways to sort of monetize those ways, dealing with divorced people in that way. But then also, if you're interested in going into the expert witness side of it, there's I would say, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to guess that the percentage of cases that I do that are divorce related is probably 20 to 30% of the cases that I work on. So
it's a pretty good percentage, actually.
Yeah, it's a really good percentage, and hence I actually developed and just taught a course. I teach a continuing education course to family law attorneys for their continuing education hours. I just did one a little while back for 140 attorneys. So and even to this day, I think, regardless of whether we're talking about family law or divorces, there's so many attorneys that are still sort of unaware of credit damages and whether it's an FCRA case. But I mean, look, you have John Watts come on, who's great with it, right? But John's not, he's one of few that's are really in it. Look, we're in the credit space, we know this, but outside of our space, it's not as well known, I think, as the way maybe we feel like it is. Sure. And so marketing and I look back on sales days, right? What's your USP, your unique selling proposition? So as a credit repair company, if you go to family law attorneys and you're saying, hey, I can help your clients recover from these problems that are going to arise during a divorce, or help them mitigate the problems that could come up during a divorce, is that something that's going to benefit you as the attorney and your client? The answer is yes to both of them. So it's a pretty simple, again, this is it's interesting. This feels like more of a marketing call as opposed to an expert witness call. But
Go ahead, give them your phone number, give them your email address. Give them everything, man. How can they get you? You know?
Yeah, but well, so this is look. I'm not telling you anything that I
Are
haven't done.
you getting divorced or thinking about getting divorced? Or if not, maybe you should call me, Doug Miner.
Right.
I can be your expert witness.
Yeah. Or I can help you with your credit or your mortgage issues, right?
That's right. You have
Well,
a client who has $100,000 in his IRA and he signed a hold harmless. You might want to advise him to make that money disappear before his spouse sues him, right?
what, what,
That was just a joke right there, guys. Because this
yeah,
is not in the public.
Steven, why you got to take it so deep, so hard? Like, what up, dude?
All right. So moving along here. So let's kind of continue. Uh, so all right. So 30 to 40% of your cases roughly are divorce. And so for those of us, we're looking for good referral partners, hanging out with family law attorneys. That may be a good way to get a referral source because obviously they're going to have jacked up credit. But then from there also, because we've listened to this show, we may be able to help them, as far as figuring out how to navigate the waters with the ex-spouse. So, let's talk a little bit about, are there any cases maybe that you've worked on? You can certainly protect the names or hide the names or change the names to protect the innocent. But I mean, any cases okay, so look, get divorced. It's a bad deal all the way around. I get that, and things are probably, the train wreck is going to keep wrecking for a while and somebody stops paying and, it's part of the way things go. But you get pissed off and you want to sue your ex and you want to try to get something from there. I mean, how does it go? I mean, do some of them go good? Some of them go bad? Do some people, are they not smart enough and they sue even though they actually can't get any assets and they just wasted their money? I mean, what do these scenarios look like here, man? Paint some pictures for us on
Yeah.
what some of these court cases look like.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they can take on lots of different colors. And you bring up an interesting point about, well, there's a few interesting points I'm going to comment on based upon what you just said. As far as, filing some sort of motion or going after your spouse for damages due to credit damage, one of the things that you can do or that I can do in my position is to say, okay, I can take a cursory look or I can take a look at the credit and look at the financials and give you a ballpark figure, right? To see if it's even worth going forward. So you're helping them instead of going out and, getting into some litigation and not knowing if there's any damages there or not. You might be brought in early on, even before the litigation is filed, to say, okay, hey man, I might charge $1,000 or $1,500 to look over some financials and the credit reports and look over what they're talking about and have a conversation with the client and or the attorney or both, and say, based upon my review of what I've seen, your damages, fairly quickly are 5 figures and may get into the 6 figures fairly quickly. And then that person can then decide, are they going to want to spend the money, to litigate it and to win, right? That's one thing. But even if you win, is there enough money on the other side that you can recoup it? Is there equity in the property? Does the spouse have money in an IRA? Where are they going to be able to find money, right? So
Find the money. Show me the money, honey.
yeah,
Let's see. We've got Benjamin.
I see that. I see the question pop up
Is it
about
okay for
house on a car loan, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess Benjamin, if you maybe want to clarify your question, is it okay to sign for a spouse? Examples like a car, like when you say sign for a spouse, do you mean like sign their signature? In which case, I would say that's probably not cool. So if you want to clarify your question, I mean, certainly, unless you have a power of attorney, you shouldn't be signing for somebody else.
Well, Steven,
yeah.
I'd look at it this way.
Okay.
I think I understand what he's asking. Look, do you
Yeah.
a loan for a car with your wife? No. Straight up, no. Do you co-sign on a credit card with your wife? No. Do you have any credit together with your spouse? No. Like, look, the only credit, in my opinion, or that I've even done in my own life, the only credit that my wife and I ever shared for 30 plus years was the mortgage. That's it. I use this analogy, it's like a thumbprint. You want your credit profile to be unique to you, and you don't want it tied up with even if it is your spouse. I think that's sort of kind of an older way of thinking, right? Like, oh, you have to do everything together. The fact is, you guys can be married, be happy, and do what you want to do as a married couple together, but you don't need to have the same credit cards or have the credit cards associated with one another. Have your own credit, keep your own credit, let the spouse have their own credit, get the car loan in their own name. And even forget about a divorce for a second. I'll give you an example. I went to a car dealership. I was going to get a car, and the car dealer ran my credit report. And the car dealer's like, oh, okay, Mr. Miner, we can get you the car. And I said, well, let me see, what's the credit? Well, I want to see my credit report, right? I'm a credit guy. I want to see my credit report. And he says, oh, you're fine, Mr. Miner. I said, well, okay, what was the credit score? He says, 680. I'm like, 680? What are you talking about? Let me see this credit report. Well, unbeknownst to me, somebody had stolen my identity, gotten a credit card around December, ran it up for Christmas, and never made a payment. Right? So there was some identity theft
They
there.
didn't even invite you on the shopping spree. That is the worst part, right?
Right. No presents, nothing.
Nothing, man.
Just some shitty credit, you know? Here, wake up in the summertime and have some shitty credit. But the point is this, that because my wife and I didn't have any credit together, my wife's credit was unaffected and she had a good score. So she bought the car in her name with the good credit and got the better deal. Right?
That's what we call a straw purchase, man. Your wife bought a car that wasn't for her, bro. Come on, man. Did you just
she benefited from it. Simmer down. Jesus. So look, in a couple situations, I'm a big believer in not associating with credit with one another. The house I get, because most people can't get to buy the house on their own, or they're not. No one's going to sit there. I would say this. I would say the likelihood of some mortgage professional or some realtor saying to someone buying a house, well, hey, listen, let your husband buy the house in his own name, and he can buy it as sole and separate property, and you can sign a quitclaim deed at escrow so that you're not obligated with him. Now, you think that conversation is going to happen very often? No.
That's because they don't hang out with Doug Miner. You're talking about quick claims and all the time. I mean, in fact, when you drive up through Starbucks, that's what's going on in your mind, right? But you're the anomaly. Okay, carry on, man. Keep going. We get distracted again.
Yeah, well, Steve. Yeah. So the point being is, no. Try to keep your credit separate as much as possible. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, and then Benjamin, you posted up this follow-up so to help your spouse buy a car. I mean, so let me dissent a little bit from Mr. Miner's opinion. I mean, what I would say is obviously, it depends upon what your financial capacity is, right? I mean, if you kind of need to help each other, then obviously, if you're not at the point where each one of you can independently get everything you need, then yeah, maybe you need to, but just understand that obviously you are co-signing, which means your ass is on the hook, right? As long as you go into it, like with that understanding, like if they stop paying, you can't look at the default that ends up happening and being like, oh, but it wasn't even my car, man. I never even drove the thing, right? So, it's just kind of a decision that if you need to do it, then do it. Just understand, obviously, that there is a responsibility, which is the lender is going to put you on the hook, if that person doesn't pay. We see that with student loans too, huh, Doug? You get like parents who sign on student loans for kids. You get all sorts of crazy things that just turn out really bad and nasty. It's kind of a wild thing. So, okay, so we were talking a little bit more about the different scenarios, how this thing may end up in court and stuff. And so, do you see cases where the damaged party sues the damaging party and the damaging party has like liquidatable assets or whatever, but they lose? Or is it usually they win because it's a breach of contract and the divorce decree said it and they clearly broke it? Like, is this an up in the air kind of a thing, or is this a very high success rate for the people that go through with it?
As far as statistically speaking, I don't know that there's any statistics as far as, are they won, are they lost, what the monetary amounts are. So I can only kind of talk about cases that, let's say, I've been involved with and what I've seen. And always keep in mind, in cases, you may not know all the particulars as the expert witness. You're you're given a certain amount of information that's related to what you're going to opine about in trial or in a deposition or in your report. So your question about how do they go, it's an interesting one, because I think what I learned as an expert witness is that although the information that I've seen dictates that the case should go in a certain direction, I always understand that there's information that I may not have seen, or somebody didn't show me, or there was some testimony in some other part of the case that sways a judge or a jury in a different direction. So it's hard to answer your question directly. I would say this: as a negotiation point, I think it's absolutely helpful, right? If you have an expert such as myself saying, and one spouse, the injured spouse is going after the spouse that injured them, but you have an expert that's saying, well, based upon the socioeconomics of the situation, the amount of equity in the property, the impact to the credit score and credit report and the profile, and the damage range may be 50,000, it may be 100,000, it could be 300,000, right? Just depending upon the socioeconomics. It's a negotiation point for the spouses to go at. I mean, they're not going to want to, if they're open to, and they know that if you think about it from the spouse who's injured the other one, and they know and they're conscious that they've actually harmed the other person's credit by their actions, by not making the payments. And then there's an expert saying, well, because you did that, you owe this person $75,000. Well, it's a question as to, well, instead of having to litigate it, maybe they negotiate it out, and they negotiated up to 40,000, but they didn't have to go through the litigation process and spend all the money for it. So
that's a good point. So, I mean, you can get retained by the attorney, but, well, maybe they even file suit, but it doesn't really go very far. I mean, maybe they file suit to, catch the attention of the other spouse, and then they immediately try to negotiate it. Or maybe, attorney A calls attorney B, and they're like, before we file suit, we would like to talk to you about settling this. So that's kind of what you're saying, is they're not all going to go all the way through litigation and getting a judgment.
Right. And that's I think in any, well, this is what I've always been told, right? The percentage of cases that make it to trial is probably in the 5% range. Right? It's very low that a case actually gets to trial. It's usually negotiated out, or something's worked out ahead of time. But if you're working as an expert witness and they need you to draft a report and quantify the damages and look over the reports and opine your opinions about it, well, okay, so if they can do that for, let's say, 5 or 10 grand, and it's worth 85 or 100 or whatever it's worth to them, and they negotiate out 50 grand, well, it was money well spent. If somebody says you can spend 5 grand, but you're gonna end up getting 60 out of it.
Sure.
Would you do it? Right?
So let's talk about this. Okay, so if roughly 30% of the cases that you handle are divorce related, are pretty much all of those between the spouses? In other words, do any of those actually involve the creditors or the credit bureaus, or are they all really just the two ex-spouses as the two parties of the suits?
I would say the majority of it is the two spouses, right? That's the majority of it. There may be some situations where a creditor, for whatever reason, maybe misreports something and it ends up on another spouse's when they weren't obligated in some way. That's a possibility. Mistakes happen. We're all human, so I'm not going to say that things outside of this sort of direct impact of one person's action affecting another, that's not the only way stuff can happen, is all I'm saying. And so to answer your question, yes, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that maybe I haven't seen yet, which is part of the interesting part of being an expert witness, because there's going to be case stuff or case information or situations that come up that you may not have seen before, or isn't as familiar as other cases. So Yeah, I
Sure.
mean, if you're
Sure.
interested in growing your credit repair business, or think about it this way: if you when you market to family law attorneys, you can pick up all these people to help them ahead of time or help them post divorce. There's a lot of ways you can help those people, develop their credit or save their credit, and you're going to get referrals from it. And the attorney's going to dig that too, right? If you save their clients some money and they're happy with what you've helped them with, it's only going to reflect good on you. So I think the question then is, how do you monetize that in the best way possible? And how do you integrate that into your credit repair business or your expert witness business?
Yeah, and it's all about looking at the client's files and asking questions, right? Not just like firing out not mine, never late letters, and crossing your fingers like the old school way. But in order to think, I mean, to be an expert, well, number one, you have to be an expert, but then you have to think like it as well, right? So if you're wanting to kind of, as a credit repair professional, maybe dip your toes into being an expert witness, I mean, the first thing is, you've got to run your practice, your credit repair practice, we'll call it that. It is a practice, right? For most people. Most people, it's a 1 or 2 or 3 person shop. You got to run your practice like an expert. Take it, find out what happened, look at it, learn, like you had mentioned Metro 2 before, help them from the credit industry standard side, but also help them figure out, factually speaking, what's going on. Do you have a divorce decree, and what all this other stuff happen? So for those folks that are listening, if they're wanting to take their practice, their personal skills to the next level, what kind of advice would you give to the CROs here? I mean, so we're all experts to a certain extent. We've all looked at lots and lots, and well, maybe not all of us. Some of you may be brand new. Maybe you haven't looked at countless credit reports, but you get my point. I mean, we,
Yeah.
we look at credit reports, and the more credit reports you look at, the more you actually are an expert. We all have prior experience in something that adds valuable insight. Your prior experience was with mortgages. So, what advice would you have for the CROs that are listening to help them take where they are with their credit repair business, and then develop the additional skill of being able to be an expert if they wanted to try to break into that niche?
Yeah, a lot. Well, I want to be encouraging as possible because I just look at myself as an example,
You don't want
right?
to be that guy that's like, oh my God, you want to be an expert witness. There's way too many. You don't want to be that guy, huh? You want to encourage them, right? Okay, so that's a good start.
Well,
I
hey,
remember
look,
talking to a lawyer once. I'm here in Dallas, and I remember talking to a lawyer once, and we were just talking about his background and where he went to school and everything. He was like, yeah, I'm not even sure why I became a lawyer. I don't know why people. I mean, there's way too many in this city. I'm like, oh, that's really encouraging. So you want to encourage people to break into the industry. All right, that's a good start, Miner. Go ahead. Sorry. Well, sorry to distract you there, brother.
no, look, hey, if when people think about these things or they imagine what they want their business to be like or they want their life to be like, I was just fortunate enough, as you said in the beginning, I sort of fell into this and I found something that I really enjoy doing. But as a credit repair organization, finding new ways to market and finding new ways to make money on people who've unfortunately had some credit problems, this is a great way to go about it. And then the sort of add on to that is, if you're look, I would say, Stephen, this the people that are part of your program and part of this group are sort of the upper echelon of people that are in the CRO space. So if they want to take it to the next level and they want to go into doing expert work and elevating what they do as an expert in credit, this is one way to do it. How can they do it? Like we talk about all the time on this show, they can contact me directly. I do teach one-on-one, and I do group classes on teaching how to do this kind of stuff and how to quantify the damages, what to look for, how to market the practice, and just different ways that I've learned to monetize what I do. So if they're interested, absolutely. Look, it's super easy. It's Doug Miner. My name's right there on the screen.
Super easy. You should buy the domain Super Easy Doug. That
Yeah.
should be like,
We'll just keep it at dougminer.com. That's just as easy as it gets for me, right?
All right, that's awesome. And so, and obviously, for those of you watching live, post up your questions here, right? We do this for you guys. So, what questions do you have for Dougie Fresh over here, man, the expert witness? Let us know, man. That's why we do this for you guys and stuff. So, all right, so we're kind of focused on divorce credit, divorce expert witness stuff, and things like that. So, like any good lawyer, they try to settle things out of court. I mean, not that you're a lawyer because you're not, but like you were saying earlier, that a lot of them settle out of court. So, like any good lawyer that you would go to as a spouse, they try to settle out of court. They use the assets in the divorce decree kind of as leverage. Try to settle it out of court. Probably the minority of cases, like, again, I know you don't know the outcomes, but the minority of cases, I would assume, end up litigating. I would assume the majority, I would think, would settle pre-litigation. I mean, do you have any insight on that at all, or you can't really speak to that?
Well, I can't say, like I said, statistically speaking, I don't have the data to this is what's going to happen. But what I can say from the cases that I work on or the attorneys that have hired me and things of that nature, I guess I would say it this way. They've all felt that my input into these situations has been helpful and educational to the attorney and to the client, right? And heck, for me, that's awesome. If I can educate them and they feel that I'm beneficial to the process and I can make a living doing that, then I'm all for it. So it's just, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but if you're like me or even not like me, there's lots of different people and all different ways they come about doing this type of work and being expert witnesses. But there, like I've spoken in other shows, there's certain commonalities between people who do expert witness work, and I think that there's, first off, they're capable. First and second, they have to be confident, capable, and able to handle the stresses of being questioned about their opinions, and being able to back up their opinions with either work experience, data, statistics, standard practices.
Of being biased, right? Like a big thing that they can try to do is accuse you of being biased, right? Like, let's talk about that. Actually, that's a really good point, right? Once you become an expert, let's talk about that real quick. So, I mean, anybody can hire you to give an expert opinion, but then if it doesn't settle and the case drags on, the opposing side is going to challenge you as an expert, and then there's probably going to be a court hearing, and you'll probably have to sit up on the bench next to the judge, and the other side is going to be like, oh, well, Doug, but I know you wrote this thing and they listed you as an expert, but really, clearly, let's just be honest, you're not an expert, right? And you're like, no, I am. And then the judge will have to make a rule. He either qualifies you or unqualifies you, basically, right? Like that's kind of the high level nutshell. If the judge says, yeah, I think Doug's a qualified expert, I think he's good, then you've now kind of had like that royal seal of approval where a judge has ruled you, decreed you, blessed you to be a qualified expert, which I know we're kind of joking, but that's really a big deal, right? Is to be a qualified expert. And so once you're qualified once, I mean, they're going to probably try to attack you maybe a couple dozen times or whatever in your first couple dozen cases. But once you get qualified the first time, I mean, and in the second and the third, it's going to be really hard for them to say that you're not qualified. And after a point, then it's just like, yeah, I mean, obviously Doug's a freaking qualified expert witness. He's done X number of cases, that are more than in these two hands right here. So, God, I totally forgot where we were going with that, Doug. That's the problem with these shows. Does my audience remember? Did you guys can you message in and tell me where I was going with that? Totally lost track. So I literally lost track on where we were going with the train of thought, bro.
I would say this, Stephen. I think what you're going after is, look, let's just leave it at this. There's a lot that people can talk about from this episode. If they're interested and they want to know more about becoming an expert, getting qualified in federal or state courts, the process, the CVs, how to make their CV look the best. And if they just want to ask me about what I do and they need some, if it's something that they want to explore, then all they have to do is go to dougminer.com or email me at doug@dougminer.com, and just ask me. And like I said, I'll do teach classes one-on-one, and I also do small groups. And then again, they may, when my next continuing education course that I do for attorneys, they may want to check that out so they can kind of see it from a different perspective. So I think, credit repair guys, the more different ways to look at how credit is affected, and if they're interested in being expert witnesses, these are the kinds of ways that I can help them and show them and give them some insight so they can see and feel how they can do it. And
you mentioned something that's interesting, like that you do continuing education for attorneys and stuff. But again, if for those of you guys who are listening here, if you're like, man, I really want to skill this thing up and I really want to tap into a higher level of professionalism. I'm not saying running a credit repair company is not, but like on a personal level, right? If you want to take your knowledge and become an expert, I mean, you can go out and do like continuing education courses for like your local, I think, realtors and mortgage, like, I don't know exactly what they're called, but I know there's a lot of folks, they'll give the local realtor, they're like qualified or whatever, certified to give continuing education classes. And all these things, if you get to where you want to be an expert, these are all good things to add to your resume, which Doug called a CV, which stands for curriculum vitae, because the courts of law love Latin, but they can't really speak Latin, so they just shorten it to the letters. So the CV is what they call your curriculum vitae, which is the fancy word for your resume. So if you can have these things, right? I mean, how is somebody going to say, well, you're not really, again, I'm kind of doing broad strokes here, but when you're sitting up there in the stand trying to defend your position as being qualified, oh, by the way, of course, I've looked at 10,000 credit reports, and I've been dealing with this for 20 years. And so, but since you asked opposing counsel, if that's not good enough to qualify me as an expert, I also am certified with a local board of whatever real estate thing. And I give these classes to real estate agents, and their license is contingent upon the quality of the class that I give. So, there's things that we could all do here that are kind of like tools in our tool chest that do add up and give us extra credibility, as we're trying to go out there and skill it up. Anything else you want to kind of add on that, Doug?
I think you're doing a good job, Stephen. Yes, I've spoken at a lot of realtor conventions and local real estate offices. Same with mortgage offices or mortgage associations, mortgage brokers associations. All of those sorts of speaking engagements lead to other speaking engagements in front of other audiences, where I just did one for there's a segment of realtors that are court appointed, and they deal specifically in divorce. So there's a certain segment of realtors that deal only in divorce real estate typically, and they have certifications for it. And then, the certification, the speaking engagements, all of these types of associations, it's a great way to fill out your resume, CV, and just add credibility to your own expertise.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, like you saw there, he pulled up the article from Divorce Mag, right? That I don't imagine that article would have been published if I didn't have the CV that I had, and I had the background knowledge too. And that article takes common things that happen in a divorce, and goes deeper into it, and goes into other ways that most realtors and most mortgage professionals and most attorneys and people in divorce don't know about. So, yeah. Me personally, I like taking it on that higher level and really showing like, hey, there's these other options out there. And all of this is all to say, hey, if you really want to be an expert and you want to get qualified and you want to make some money doing it, all it really takes for the most part is the capability and the desire, and then filling in, how to defend things and how to write a report and how to make your CV look good. All of those types of things I can help you with and teach you how to do.
Absolutely. And Benjamin, man, really good question here. Is the public allowed to go to court and watch a court case to see how it is run? So yeah, I mean, absolutely, except for limited circumstance. You're not going to go into the FISA court because that's like top secret Stargate Court. Maybe if a case, I mean, I guess, Doug, can a case be sealed? I mean, but typically, yes. I mean, you can go into any case, but is there a way, like if it's like maybe like some sort of a high, like maybe, you're kind of dealing with minors or something? Like, is there scenarios that you know of where you can't go into a court case, or are they all pretty much open to the public?
Okay, so you're bringing up an interesting point, and I'll answer it this way. As far as the public being able to go into a courtroom and watch some of this stuff go on, I haven't ever seen a judge kick everybody out, or there's people in the courtroom, and there's people in the, I guess you call it the gallery, in addition to people that
in the gallery than the galley.
Yeah, right. And there's, besides people that may be in the jury box and things of that nature. So I don't ever recall a case that I particularly worked on where a judge kicked anybody out of the courtroom. But what I will say is, as an expert witness, you are not allowed to go in the courtroom prior to your testimony. Meaning, when I'm called to a courthouse, let's say the hearing or the trial is beginning at 9 a.m. and they say, "All right, Doug, hey, come on down." And I may sit in the hallway of the courthouse for 45 minutes until they're ready to call me to go on the stand.
You get your ear up against the door. You're like trying to listen in.
No.
And you're like, dude, wait, let me get some good little nuggets here so I can taint my my testimony, huh?
No, not at all.
Just a joke. Just
yeah.
Hello world.
Yeah, but so what they'll do is eventually when you're called, they'll come out in the hall and say, "All right, Doug, we're ready for you." And you walk in the courtroom and they'll swear you in, and then you'll get up on the stand and answer questions for a while.
And it's actually really, really cool, Benjamin. I mean, if you haven't, if you know some attorneys, you want to find, I mean, I guess there's different types of attorneys. I was going to say a litigator. Litigators are the ones that are in the courts all the time. I mean, I guess you could find a family law attorney, but they're litigators too, I guess, if they're going to court. But yeah, if you haven't been, that would be kind of a cool experience. If you can go with somebody, an attorney that maybe to one of his or her hearings, that would be a really cool experience for you to just see how it is, right? But I mean, you actually don't need to know anybody. You can literally just go up in there, and to Doug's point, unless the judge kicks people out, which is a very rare thing, we do have open courts in this country. Yeah. So.
Well, another thing, Stephen, you could ask John Watts about this, or maybe Cardozo, one of these guys. With a lot of things being done on Zoom, or there might be court TV, or there's ways to go into the courtroom, and you may not even have to go to the actual courthouse itself. You may be able to just log in and watch it on your
hack into Zoom, huh? Just be like, we're gonna
hack into Zoom. I'm sure there's some other. I believe that. From what I've been told, I believe there's some other ways of seeing the courtroom without actually going in there. And
there's other ways to join a Zoom without hacking, is what you're saying. I got you. So remember that guy in Texas a couple months ago? He had the kitten filter on his face. Remember that guy? He went viral.
No, I don't. I guess I don't want.
How did you miss that? This dude was the attorney, and like his kid or whatever had used his computer before the Zoom or something, and so when he logged in, it had the filter feature, and he had it was a white kitten face, and you could see his eyes were like the guy was like, oh my God. The judge was actually pretty cool about it, but the judge actually released that clip as a public service announcement to just check your computer before you appear in court, and you look like a kitten. So anyway.
Well, cool. Let's wrap this up, Stephen.
Yes. On that note, we will get this bad boy wrapped up. So again, DougMiner.com. If you want to talk to Doug, he's happy to talk to you. And of course, if you're interested in more of what we talk about with pre-litigation, we've got the amazing $99 a month with a 30-day free trial training course. You can go to creditrepairtrainingcourse.com. Also, we have the very first software in the marketplace that will allow you to create Metro 2 factual disputes, actual dispute letters, putting the data from all three bureaus into one letter, and you can generate your own templates as well. You can go to palmierisystemdemo.com and take a look there. That being said, we appreciate all of you guys for being here. I don't see any other comments. Doug, we're going to go ahead and sign off here. And for all of you guys, we will see you on the next show.